is required, falls slap bang in the middle of that range. So China's growing exactly in line with what it projected. And if people actually begin to read what China do, they see that China is advancing in line with the targets which it itself set. Not what somebody else invented. That's what it says it's going to do. But if you look at it internationally, that means the US economy grows at slightly over 2% a year. That means China's economy has grown more than twice as fast as the US. And Europe's economy grows a little bit above 1% a year, and Japan also. So that means China's economy is growing more than twice as fast as the United States. It's growing 4 times as fast as Europe and Japan. But the other thing, which is crucial, and this is the authoritative thing, is the technological character of this. Because China has achieved during this 14th five-year plan something no developing economy has ever achieved before. That is to become a technological leader. In a number of ways, I'm not thinking that China is the technological leader in everything. You've had developing countries which grew very rapidly before, not as fast as China, but nevertheless they were growing fast. But none of them became a technological leader, and that's what China's achieved. It's achieved it in EVs, it's achieved it in renewable energy, it's achieved it in pharmaceuticals, it's achieved it in sectors of AI, and that is something new, and that's obviously going to develop much further during the new five-year plan. So China's grown exactly in the way in which it projected. So if the West is surprised about this, it's because they haven't bothered to find out what China itself has been projecting. And China's outperformed its goals ever since Deng Xiaoping took them, set these goals at the time before it opened up, and it continues to hit the goals which it set. So that's what the outcome's coming, and the latest five-year plan and this year's growth targets are entirely in line with what China projected.
I want to take on some criticisms because I'm not necessarily equipped to answer them, but I think that you might. So I'm going to ask you a three-part question. So critics often point out, structural issues in China. So I would say a lot of people point to unemployment, which I clock at 5.2%. I think that's healthy. I don't know, but a lot of people say China has an unemployment issue. People point at the real estate issue, that the price of real estate has gone down over the last 5 years, and people point at consumption, and that China needs to increase consumption. How do you look at these three metrics?
Well, the first one is, let's take the question of unemployment. Unemployment in China is not excessive. It has an issue which the government has to pay great deal of attention to, which is to find the rate of growth of productivity in China is very fast. One of the fastest in the world, probably the fastest in the world. Now that creates a problem. That means that therefore the economy has to grow fast, otherwise you will have unemployment, because that's the inevitable thing. If you can produce the same output with less people, that's what the project is. The economy has got to grow fast. And then, as in all countries, the new entrants into the workforce, that is young people, are less skilled and less experienced, and therefore less employable than people who have got long experience. That's the same with every country in the world. This is under pressure on employment. Unemployment shows up amongst young people. For that reason, I'd say. There's no great crisis. It's just a matter which China has to pay you some attention to, and it is paying attention to. And one of the key targets, which is in the five-year plan, is expansion employment. On the question of consumption, this is a hopeless confusion in the West. Absolute hopeless confusion. Right? They don't understand it, because the boost in consumption could mean one of two things. And not only is it necessary to separate them, but they're directly contradictory. It could mean that you have to expand consumption as fast as possible. Well, that's very, very important, because consumption is the material basis of people's living standards. That determines how much they can buy, how much food, how much housing, how many holidays they can take. It's extremely important. But it's used in the West frequently as another thing, which is to say what it is we should have the highest percentage of consumption in GDP. Well, not merely is it the same thing, they're directly contradictory. The higher the percentage of consumption in GDP, the more slowly consumption will grow. This is not really what you would expect from French economic theory. It's just confirmed by the facts. Therefore, when they say boost consumption, they can mean two different things. One which is, I entirely agree with, which is that you have to increase the rate of living standards as fast as possible, which is consumption. there's a limit to that, because you also have to invest and so on and so forth. But as much as sustainably possible, as rapidly as possible. And the second one is that you have to increase the percent of the consumption of GDP, in which case the rate of growth of consumption will slow down. This is hopelessly confused from the point of theoretical economics, right? Okay. The reason is very simple, because consumption, by definition, is not an input into production. If something is input into production, it's not consumption. So therefore, if you are reducing the inputs into production by increasing the percentage of consumption, then the economy will grow more slowly and consumption will grow slowly. So this whole thing is absolutely, for hopeless confusion in the West. Yeah, I started studying China's economy in 1978. And I wrote my first big article on China's economy in 1992, which is, I don't know, that's 34 years ago. Okay. And this is China continuing its transitions. In 1978, the big problem in China was to make sure everybody had a house and make sure everybody had enough food. That was the focus then. When it moved into medium technology, let's say production of personal computers, electronic goods, etc. And now it's making a transition into another type of thing, which is high technology. Well, so of course, some sectors of the economy are contracting, and other sectors of the economy are growing very fast. That's why you have to use GDP and averages. Because you will always be able to find something below the average, and you will always be able to find something above the average. I mean, you can always predict, it wouldn't matter where it was, you would always find something which is performing worse than the average, and that's because the sectors which are becoming less important, and that's what's happening in real estate. That's why you have to look at the economy as a whole. You can't rip a thing out of context, because if you cherry pick, you will always be able to find something. I could equally find something which has grown at 25 or 30%. I claim that the economy is, growing at an unbelievable level, and it's just absolute nonsense what the economy is at.
Wow, I've never really thought about it that way. Actually, you've completely changed my outlook on how to view the economy. Thank you for that. I want to talk about poverty alleviation, because China raised, depending on how we look at it, hundreds of millions of people out of extreme poverty. How does this compare to models in the West, and what lessons can the West learn? Because I know there's poverty in the United States, and there's extreme poverty in the United States, 1.25%, I believe. What can developing countries learn from China's model?
Well, I think two things. One, China to go back to 1978, 850 million people out of World Bank defined poverty. It's, one time with almost 100% of those who've been taken out of poverty. I'm glad to see that some other countries, India, for example, now in some parts of sub-Saharan Africa are growing in. So China's no longer 100%, which is good, because I want those countries to get out of poverty as well. But nevertheless, it's the single biggest contribution to that. And there are two factors in this. One is there is no substitute for rapid economic growth. If you cannot lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty via redistribution, as it's put in China, socialism, or let's not use socialism, let's just say good life is not redistribution or the equal distribution of poverty. That's not what it's about. Right? You have to grow. There is no substitute for rapid economic growth. But the other big lesson is that, as you will find out in Europe and in the United States, trickle down doesn't work. I mean, in the United States, why is there so much political discontent and why is there such poverty? The economy has been growing not as fast as China, but relatively reasonably. 2% a year would be enough to maintain the increase in living standards. It's all been going to the top 10% of the population. Therefore, the sections in the United States at the bottom have been getting worse off. They're not even maintaining their position. And China has two things. One is it's the increase in real wages. That is the average income of the population. The studies done by the International Labour Organization show that for decades, China has had the fastest growth of real wages, that is inflation-adjusted wages in the world. So you have two processes going on. One is that the poorest people are being lifted out of poverty, which is fantastic and gets headlines, it's great. But it also means the average standard of living is growing very fast. The second and final thing is, however, even if you don't rely upon trickle down, which China doesn't, the final, let's say in China 50 million, or the final 5% or 10% of the economy, won't occur spontaneously. For China to get rid of the final things of poverty, you had to have a mass mobilization of hundreds of thousands of people involved in this. And hundreds of thousands of people were involved in implementing the Kanal, and tens of millions of people affected, because this had to be such as